In Homestead, Pennsylvania, someone is raping elderly women in the dead of night.
That was a despicable crime.
Certainly a lot of fear.
Police have clues, but no suspects.
Somebody that we knew and that was just getting off, watching us.
Then a psychic has a vision of the attacks.
Horrible violence and screaming.
And the attacker.
This guy was like Spider-Man.
She also makes a chilling prediction.
We were going to have a murder rather than a vicious assault.
Can her mysterious visions help the police to catch a rapist before he becomes a killer? Homestead, Pennsylvania, a small neighborly town on the outskirts of Pittsburgh.
You knew the next door neighbors so well, they were like your own family.
A town built on steel.
Armor for tanks, armor for the ships. We were very much an important part of World War II in Homestead.
But in the mid-1980s, U.S. Steel is leaving Homestead, and with it, 15,000 jobs disappear.
It sort of was like a death blow to Homestead.
And something else is unraveling the fabric of this close-knit community. A rapist is attacking elderly women in their own homes in the dead of night.
It's like somebody raped my mother.
The first assault took place on August 10th, 1983. An 86-year-old woman living alone is attacked and raped in her bedroom. Detective Tom Hobart is the first officer on the scene.
Most people in the town knew each other. If you didn't know them, you knew family members. You knew someone associated with that family. That was a despicable crime. We'd take a lead and we would exhaust that lead. We worked that case for a number of years, and it seemed like at everything we were doing, we were running into dead ends.
No arrest is made and the case goes cold. But 2 years later, a 61-year-old woman is raped in her second-floor bedroom, a carbon copy of the first assault.
I was born and raised in this town. The first two victims I knew personally. These are our folks. These are our people. We knew them. We knew their sons, their daughters.
People tend to forget. They didn't immediately associate the two crimes. We, however, associated immediately just because of the MO, if you will.
Though police know the rapes are connected, they have no suspect.
The victim never saw anything. The victim would awake with him placing something over their face, whether it was a pillow, a blanket, whatever he could. But he always covered their face.
We knew fingerprints matched, but we couldn't match them to anybody at the time. We had serology matches and pubic hair samples.
Forensics evidence told us that he was a black male. We knew he was a rather large man. The victims, when they would describe, they'd actually use their hands and say, you know, I grabbed him and his arms were big.
You take a small area that is saturated with dogs and none of the dogs barked. We knew that this individual responsible lived in the immediate neighborhood.
He was probably a younger man because his method of entering these homes, he had to be strong, he had to be agile. Forensically, we had the evidence from the very beginning. We just didn't have a suspect.
But you got to imagine, other crimes go on. We're a small town, a small department, so we had to pool resources as we need them. We couldn't let the rest of the town suffer because of these incidents.
The rapist leaves clues, but the police still have no suspects, and there is no arrest. Then, 18 months later, a third attack. A 75-year-old widow raped in her second-floor bedroom.
Evidence was pointing to one person that they realized they had a serial rapist on their hands.
The interviewing the women broke your heart. It was very, very embarrassing for them to sit down and talk to me. I was a young man. It just became very personal.
Saving this community was our mission.
The frustration that set in from not being able to find the assailant.
I don't think Hobart went home for a week. I mean, when he did go home, I had to order him home.
With the culprit still at large, Detective Hobart does something unusual. His brother met a psychic at a party and suggests she might be able to help.
He's very skeptical of psychics, and he had went to a party in the Greensburg area, where Nancy's from, and he had met her at the party, and that she was a psychic, and she did a couple neat things that he thought were pretty neat. We chased all our forensic leads down. We hit dead ends with those. When you ask a policeman how to do something, you get a police response. Policemen think the same way. We may as well get someone in from the outside who can give us a new perspective. Whether it was good information or bad information, it was going to be new information. And when he gave me this idea, I thought, why not?
You know, I kind of fluffed it off at first, and then I realized, you know, he's serious. And I said, hey, let's go for it. See what can happen. It certainly couldn't hurt.
Nancy Meyer is a psychic who specializes in what she calls ranging.
What I usually use when I'm working on cases, the environment itself. The whole environment absorbs what happened. It runs as a movie, but I'm in it, and I can pull the information out.
I contact Nancy, and I asked Nancy if she could meet with me, maybe provide me with whatever she could do to help.
Give me a time and I'll be there, because these women who were being assaulted were the age of my own mother.
I had hoped that Nancy would come in and say, here we go, this is the guy you're looking for, let's go knock on his door, and I'd open the door and I'd arrest him and the case would be over. That's not what happened.
But before the psychic gets a chance to meet the detective, there is another rape, just 2 weeks after the third. A 64-year-old woman is viciously assaulted in her second-floor bedroom, but police still have no one in their sights. When they finally meet, Detective Hobart tells the psychic nothing about the case.
I wanted her to be able to come in and tell me something, not me tell her. She did request that her and I walk the general area because she said that she would get a better read, a better vibrations on what she was looking for. I walked several steps behind Nancy and let Nancy lead the way.
As they walk through the 2-block area where all 4 of the rapes occurred, Nancy Meyer appears to tune in on the crimes.
Several times, she stopped right in front of one of the homes and would say, I'm getting some bad feelings from this house.
The assaults were so bad, it came right through the walls of the house.
Okay.
Somehow, Nancy Meyer is able to pinpoint information that only the police knew. Remarkably, she is able to tell the detective in which homes the attacks occurred.
Picking the homes where the assaults took place, it was uncanny. She was saying things that no one told her, but I knew to be fact already.
And now, Nancy claims she can see the actual attacks.
In the images, I saw that he was African American. It was his neighborhood. He knew the streets. He knew how to get from one house to the other. He even recognized the people. And then I'd be looking up at the side of the house, realizing this guy was like Spider-Man. He climbed drain pipes. He went up the sides of houses. He was going in second-story windows. He clearly enjoyed the risk.
As to how that entry was made were very, very accurate, as if she almost knew what had taken place.
He would come in the window, and he would stand for a while looking at his victim sleeping. And it was very clear by the time I got to the 4th property that I was picking up the exact same thought patterns on every single one of those properties. There was no deviation.
But what she tells the detective next is something he didn't know.
It was a street light, and as he turned to look to the street, I got a good visual of his face.
So I asked her, I said, if you could draw him? And she said, yeah.
And I said, holy hell, we got the break we've been hunting for.
But is it enough to stop a serial rapist before he strikes again? In Homestead, Pennsylvania, a faceless rapist is targeting elderly women in their homes. Stymied, the police call in a psychic for help.
Whether it was good information or bad information, it was going to be new information.
Who claims to see the attacker's face.
And as he turned, I got a good visual of his face.
Something no one up to now had been able to do.
We got the break we've been hunting for.
Because Nancy's psychic description of the rapist is so specific, Detective Hobart brings in a police sketch artist.
He's got a broad face, the eyes.
Mainly we use composites and sketch artists to eliminate people more so than who it is, it's who it isn't. Most people have seen the overlays that are... We actually had a sketch artist that did the drawings. He changed whatever Nancy was feeling that wasn't right. He changed.
He has this leather hat. Every time I visualize him, he has this hat on.
Normal practice is to remove anything like a hat from the sketch so as to focus on the suspect's features, but producing a police sketch based on the word of a psychic is anything but normal.
I'm off to the side. I have nothing to do with Nancy explaining the sketch artist. I'm just accompanying her. And it's a long day. The hat's not right. You have to move the hat this way. You have to move. I was becoming frustrated, and the sketch artist was becoming frustrated. It's a hat. It's a hat. You know, but no, a hat had to be a certain way.
But we got in an argument over the hat. You don't put a hat on a sketch. This is against protocol. You don't do it. And I said, yes, but if people are to recognize him, the hat has to be on him because he's never without it.
As far as a clue that we were going to go out and everybody had a hat on, and that wasn't the situation. A lot of people wear hats. Nancy explained a black leather cap, and she had it over and over. I felt sorry for the sketch artist, how many times she made him change the hat.
And we told our officers, look, this is not an official wanted poster. This is not something that a victim of a crime has produced. This came from Nancy, a psychic.
And as most people have seen sketch artists, they're never going to be a photograph. But we were still looking at this saying, hey, it's better than what we had.
A very broad nose at the bottom.
But before the psychic sketch is even circulated, the rapist strikes yet again. April 24th, 1987, just 5 weeks after the last attack, a 76-year-old widow is assaulted in her home.
Each one escalated that he became much more aggressive.
The entire town is on edge.
Not panic, but it was certainly a lot of fear.
We had now formed an actual task force where we were on the streets every day.
There were a lot of tired policemen from Allegheny County and the sheriff's departments.
With the attacks intensifying, police ask the psychic for help again, but this time she takes a different approach.
And I said, I think we need to get ahead of this guy and start using my abilities to figure out where he's going to target next. And as we crossed over one street, I could pick up this man walking around late at night, checking out when people's lights were going off. And I noticed that he was on this street quite a bit. And I said to Tommy, this has to be near where he's living, because I keep sensing him.
And what the psychic says next is the last thing that police wanted to hear.
Nancy said, we have to get this guy. We're going to have to get him soon because
we were going to have a murder rather than a vicious assault.
And with the psychic's next revelation, the investigation takes an astonishing turn.
And I felt him checking a house out particularly closely.
And she said, this is not one of your victims, but I'm getting some bad energy coming from this house. Do you know who lives here? There was no indication of the house that who lived there. There was no special signs on the door or anything like that. It looked like any other house in the neighborhood. So when she picked that out, it raised the hair on my neck, because there was no reason for Nancy to be able to pick that particular house out and not knowing anything about the resident of the house. However, I knew that was a relative of the chief's.
For Police Chief Kelly, the case has just become up close and personal. He takes the psychic's warning seriously and stakes out his grandmother's house.
I got my German Shepherd. Tell him to come on. Bring it on. When you're sitting there in the silence waiting for something brutal to come in, you knew that probably it was going to be a life or death situation. You're aware of every single sound in the night. You can hear your heart pound. The adrenaline takes over. And you're crushed when any of these ladies are victimized the way they were. And it's personal.
But the chief's grandmother isn't the next to fall prey to the rapist. 2 weeks after Nancy's chilling prediction, on a hot June night, an 86-year-old woman living just yards from the chief's grandmother becomes victim number 6.
I was devastated. It was at a lady's house who shared the same alley and the same ethnic last name. In fact, they were related.
It was like, ha, I know you're here. I can still do it.
Despite working night and day, police appear no closer to capturing this elusive predator.
Many times, I would get up out of bed, come to Homestead, hide in an alley, sit in a car, sit on the side of the road, hoping that I would see something.
The police were passing out boat horns for the women, 200 of them in fact, so that they could blow a horn at least and have the police come because they were loud horns. They were advising people to buy dogs.
We were doing everything humanly possible.
The residents were living in a lockdown fear. It wasn't a community that has whole house air conditioning. It was hot. It was summertime. It was blazing hot. They couldn't open a window and put a fan in the window for fear that someone would crawl through that window.
They lived in jail while the perpetrator was probably walking around watching us. And we had to catch this guy.
I was riding up the hill and I saw this elderly lady that I knew carrying some grocery bags up the hill. And I stopped and I says, come on, get in, I'll ride you home. It's just too hot. And you shouldn't be walking in this hot day, you know. It gave her a little bit of hell. And when I dropped her off at her house, I personally had said to her, check your windows and just be careful. And she says, okay, you know. I just walked into the station and Chief Kelly said, we had another rape yesterday. And I said, oh man, like, who was it? And he mentioned the name, and it was the lady that I had taken up the hill.
Despite the mayor's warning, on August 25th, the 76-year-old lady became the 7th victim. It was 2 months after the 6th attack, but this time the violence has escalated to a dangerous level. Fear has gripped Homestead, Pennsylvania. A serial rapist is preying on elderly women, and police seem powerless to stop him.
These are our people. We knew them.
Chased all our forensic leads down. We hit dead ends with those. The frustration set in.
Psychic Nancy Meyer is helping with the investigation. She's certain, if not caught soon, the rapist will turn killer.
We were going to have a murder rather than a vicious assault.
At the scene of the last rape, they had found a large knife on the steps of her home that he had threatened to cut her throat if she didn't stop fighting.
We were convinced 100% that we were dealing with somebody that we knew and that was just getting off, watching us.
But it was, again, looking for that proverbial needle in a haystack. He wasn't going to appear to be public enemy number one. He was going to appear to be a nice young man.
With the investigation hitting a wall, Detective Hobart again contacts the psychic.
After the last victim, Nancy and I spoke again. I was eating, sleeping, and drinking this case, along with other officers. I wasn't the only officer doing that. I'm sure that my frustrations of being unable to locate this guy were starting to show.
When I said, Tommy, you're going to have him by next week. It's going to be over with. You're going to arrest him. You won't need me anymore. I'll believe that when I see it. But he said, gee, I hope you're right. I said, I hope I'm right. I hope this nightmare's over with.
And then, the break the entire town has been waiting for.
None of our victims had anything ever taken from them until our last victim.
One of those items was a shotgun.
The phone rang, 3 o'clock in the morning. It was a guy I know, and he said, I know who you're hunting for. I said, come on. They took a shotgun last night, didn't they? We never publicized that. Never. And he said, it's over Steel City Arms over in Braddock. The guy's trying to sell it. I can set it up for you.
The informant sets up the buy, and the police, armed with the psychic's sketch, stake out the pawn shop and wait. When the suspect arrives and takes back possession of the gun, the police are there to arrest him.
And I had the sketch sitting next to me on the seat. And he turned and kind of looked at me. I said, this was like a photograph of this guy. And of course, at the time, my belief in the psychics went sky high.
When he did return and when he did take back custody of the shotgun, they were there to arrest him on a charge of receiving stolen property. And to this point, they didn't have his fingerprints.
We brought him into the police department. Mirandized him, his rights, rolled his fingerprints. We had a district attorney there advising us to make sure that every move we made was calculated, that there's not going to be any mistakes. This man is going to go to trial. There's not going to be any motions to suppress. There's not going to be any technicalities to walk on.
We called a fingerprint expert. When he prepared the prints, he just looked up and said, gentlemen, it's over.
You would have thought everybody in the room would have been high-fiving or yelling or screaming. Wasn't a sound in the room.
Matched the fingerprints, and all the forensic evidence on down the line matched.
After 4 years and 7 vicious attacks, the man arrested is 22-year-old Dennis Foy. Unemployed, Foy lived with his parents on the same block where one of the rapes occurred.
Foy's arrest in the fall of 1987 came after his case received not only local but national publicity.
I think my feeling is for the victims, and they're through it, so am I.
Thank God that these women that were raped were heroes enough to go to court.
You saw 3 widows and a woman who had never married, who had told police she in fact had been a virgin, a 76-year-old woman, had to testify in detail.
A year later at his trial, Foy faced the women he violated. In court, the jury hear the intimate details of Foy's trail of terror. He knew his victims and staked out their homes, waiting for his chance. He broke in by scaling the side of a house and entering through a second-floor window. Inside, he attacked the defenseless women and stifled their cries for help with a pillow or whatever else was nearby. Sometimes he tied their feet and hands. He threatened his final victim with a knife. The judge described his acts as unspeakable. Foy is convicted on all counts and receives 100 years in maximum security prison. With no inside knowledge, how could psychic Nancy Meyer have known so much about this case? She knew the attacker was African American, lived in the neighborhood, and knew his victims. Through her psychic ranging, she described how he entered each home through the second-story window, and she correctly predicted when the investigation would be over. And what about that hat? When Dennis Foy was arrested, he wore a hat eerily similar to the one Nancy had the sketch artist draw.
If you're gonna put a hat on somebody, you put a hat on, whatever. But she wanted it tilted a certain way. She wanted it to be, to cover a certain part, you know, the head. The things that amazed me is she hit so many things right. And the last thing was the hat. She just had, the hat was just, it was there. It was the way she described it and painstakingly described it.
Today, Homestead, Pennsylvania is bouncing back from economic downturn.
We haven't bounced back to where we should be, but we had a developer that bought the U.S. Steel property. Right now it's called the Waterfront.
But no one can forget those 5 years when one man held an entire community hostage.
You know, these acts affect a lot of people. Thank goodness they caught him. Who knows what the next step might have been.
You'll never lose that feeling, you know. You'll never lose the feeling that you could have done more for these people.
Just to do it for fun, I don't think so. It's not fun ranging assaults like that. There's nothing fun about it. But when it gets results, then it's worth it.
She said we would have them, and it wasn't shortly thereafter that we did. So, you explain it.
A Vancouver area nightclub owner vanishes into thin air.
I felt something was very, very wrong.
Police think he's fled town for a new life under a new identity.
He's probably someone who has gone missing and does not want to be found.
But a psychic sees things differently.
I felt that there was foul play.
And his fiancée refuses to believe he'd ever leave her.
It's like he was like the closest person to me. No way.
Can a psychic help a desperate woman solve the mystery of what happened to Bill Rudy?
I certainly didn't feel like he slipped in the bathtub.
On Canada's Wild West coast, Vancouver, British Columbia is one of the most exciting cities in the world, especially when the sun goes down. In the early 1990s, one of the area's hottest nightclubs was Rumors. Its owner was 51-year-old Bill Rudy. The multimillionaire has investments in nightclubs and real estate, and the cash is rolling in. And Bill Rudy lavished a lot of that money on his fiancée, Janet Bignell.
He used to totally spoil me, and we'd go out, and everywhere we went, it was always fun.
The couple were making plans together. Bill Rudy told Janet that he was ready to cash in his chips and start a new life with her in a small town east of Vancouver, near Janet's parents.
What we were going to do is actually liquidate everything and then move to Kelowna. Basically, because Bill and I were going to move, I no longer had my own house because we were going to be buying a new house.
It seemed like everything was falling into place for Bill and Janet. But then he does something odd. In February of 1994, Bill checks into a local motel, telling Janet he needs to sort out his tangled business affairs before he makes the final move.
He wanted just to take a week and sort all the tax things out and just have peace and quiet where nobody knew where he was.
On Monday evening, February 21st, Bill and Janet spoke on the phone.
He just said that he was just going to get something to eat and then he was going to go to bed. So he did call me that evening, and it was around 9 o'clock.
But the next day, she doesn't hear from him.
I paged him throughout the day, and nothing. Then that evening, we were supposed to go out for dinner. I had a babysitter booked for 6 o'clock, and still nothing.
2 days pass, and Janet still doesn't hear from Bill Rudy.
Just the knot in your stomach, I felt something was very, very wrong.
Desperately worried, she goes to the police, but they don't see the disappearance of Bill Rudy as a top priority.
One of them even said, well, obviously if it was a child, we would take it more seriously. But when they're adults, people can just go away.
But the police are obligated to do at least a routine investigation. They dig around a little and discover that Bill Rudy has one good reason to disappear.
Bill Rudy had an ex-wife who he was still having some problems with and issues.
And as they dig deeper, they begin to believe that Bill Rudy may be missing on purpose.
Rudy was planning to get out of the business, had taken care of his debts, and he was ready to move on.
But Janet refuses to believe that Bill would ever leave her.
People don't know him on a personal level. Sure, they may know him on a business level, but no way.
A fiancée is not quite the same as a wife, and there are many times where a girlfriend fiancée thinks that the relationship is maybe further along than it actually is.
But Janet had gone to Rudy's hotel room 4 days after he went missing. What she found convinced her this was not the room of a man who wanted to disappear.
I go into the room and everything is there. The closet's full of clothes, his toothbrush is in the glass, his razor is plugged in.
Distraught and now dissatisfied with the police investigation, Janet decides to call a psychic.
The motivation was to try to find out what happened to him. I totally believe in psychics, and obviously it wasn't going to hurt.
Janet's friends suggest she contact Lori McQuarrie, a well-known psychic who lives in Portland, Oregon.
I liked her, and I thought that this was a kind woman who was really in distress, and yet, even under all the stress, she was very, very driven. She was very focused on finding this answer, and I wanted to help her.
The psychic asks Janet to send her information on Bill Rudy right away.
I want a picture, a birth date, and a name, a map of the area where they were last seen.
Lori uses a psychic technique she calls victimology.
I can sit down and just looking at that picture, it's just focusing and allowing it to flow. And I get a story. I get a total story. And I just start writing.
And the story Lori is getting about Bill Rudy is deeply disturbing.
If I weren't a psychic, I would be going, well, gee, this looks like a businessman. And what came through was, we have two people here. We have a man who presents himself as being the honest businessman, and then we have the hidden side. How do you tell this poor girl that her missing fiancé is a really nasty man and I don't like him? But I said it.
I didn't want to believe her. Half of me is still skeptical. Well, okay, it's a psychic. It's not science.
When I said this is a bad man, I believe I recall her saying, I know. He's not perfect.
To Janet, Bill is the man she loves and plans to marry. But the psychic is onto something. The police have discovered that in his business life, Bill Rudy did have a hidden side.
Bill Rudy used a number of aliases in the past, mostly to cover on somewhat shady business deals and houses and mortgages and things. But it showed that he was not above manipulating and fudging the rules.
And Janet did know Bill Rudy had secrets. When they first met, he lied about his real name.
He told me his name was John Andrews. The reason he was using these names is so that his ex-wife couldn't track him, and I totally believed him.
A person who uses aliases is not the most honest person in the world, usually using those aliases to his advantage, to someone else's or the government's disadvantage.
But Janet is desperate to find out what happened to the love of her life. Now it seems the psychic is the only one who can help her.
She gave me positive encouragement. She was always available. I talked to her many times throughout.
Not only has the psychic sensed that all is not what it seems with Bill Rudy, now she gives his fiancée some truly chilling news.
I knew he was gone. It's kind of like they say in the search and rescue world, it is no longer a rescue, it's a recovery.
You know, to me, he still could have been missing, but Lori said no, he's gone.
If the psychic is right, how did Bill Rudy die, and where is his body? Near Vancouver, British Columbia, nightclub owner Bill Rudy has vanished without a trace. The police think he's hiding and doesn't want to be found, but psychic Lori McQuarrie senses he's dead.
I knew he was gone.
Janet Bignell asks the psychic to come to Vancouver and help to solve the mystery of her missing fiancé.
It was like two forces coming together. She was anxious for me to come up, and I was hoping to put a piece to the puzzle.
Desperate to find Bill Rudy, for Janet, no price is too high. But Lori surprises her.
And I wouldn't have cared how much it cost, and she said no. She said, I don't take money for missing people. And I said, well, why not? And she goes, because then I would lose my gift.
But Lori does have a strange request.
She asked me to make a reservation at the hotel and in the same room from where Bill went missing.
Part of victimology for me is once I've gotten the initial facts, then if it's possible, I want to follow a physical route. I want to see physical surroundings that this person lived in and were around.
As soon as Lori arrives in Vancouver, she heads straight to the hotel. She checks into room 206, the room in which Bill Rudy stayed.
As I sat in the room, I could feel myself looking at maps on a bed, looking at papers, contracts, all the things that assembled his world.
In the room, alone, Lori tunes in again to Bill Rudy's fate. Not only is he dead, but she believes he's been murdered.
I felt that there was foul play. I certainly didn't feel like he slipped in the bathtub.
That was very painful for me to hear as well.
She wasn't all that shocked when I told her that I thought he had been murdered. I think, again, this had been simmering someplace in the back of her mind.
But the Royal Canadian Mounted Police aren't interested in working with psychics. In their eyes, Bill Rudy had deliberately disappeared.
You really can't take it to the homicide squad unless you have fairly good evidence that it's a homicide. In this case, we did not have a crime scene or a body.
Nevertheless, if the psychic is right, what did happen to Bill Rudy? Janet has her suspicions, and they all center around Rudy's business partner and Rumor's manager, David Lowe.
Bill didn't trust him anymore.
In a ploy to hide money from his ex-wife, Bill Rudy had put the Rumors nightclub in David Lowe's name. In return, Lowe had been paying Rudy $5,000 cash a week for over 2 years. But just before he disappeared, the payments started coming up short.
It was the first time that Dave Lowe had not come up with all the money. He's like stalling him and giving him a lot of excuses.
Janet Bignell's word is not enough for the police. They need concrete evidence. For that, she hires Ozzie Caban, a private investigator, to watch and follow David Lowe.
Based on undercover operations, based on street talk and everything else, that was the guy of interest to us.
But even Ozzie can't uncover any new evidence, and Bill Rudy's secret life doesn't help.
We had an individual with about 6 different aliases, businesses all over the countryside. We realize that we're dealing with a situation here that, shall we say, is a little shady, a little on the dark side.
None of that, however, matters to Janet.
All I wanted to do is find out what happened to him.
To do that, she asks the psychic and the private eye to join forces. Maybe they can solve the puzzle of what happened to her fiancé. And Lori thinks the best place to start is at the nightclub.
She wanted to see if she could feel Bill's energy, and I was scared to go.
Ozzie thinks it's too dangerous for Lori to go alone, so he sends an undercover off-duty police officer to protect her. Lori and the cop shoot pool, but her mind is not on the ball. Her psychic senses are telling her details of Bill Rudy's death.
I immediately knew that I was on the right track. Bill Rudy had died here. I knew it. I knew it beyond a shadow of a doubt.
She says she can see how Bill Rudy died. And she says it was a brutal murder.
I felt that there had been a blow to the back of the head. I didn't feel like he had a one-on-one confrontation knowing it was coming. I think it was up behind him and total surprise.
If Bill Rudy has been murdered like the psychic says, was it his business partner? And where on earth is Bill Rudy's body? The psychic believes his body has been dumped in the woods.
What I felt was really surrounding him as, laying there in whatever state he was in was definitely rural.
So Lori and Janet hit the road in search of Bill Rudy.
She wasn't familiar with the area at all, and yet she's the one telling me which way to go.
Yes, I felt the sense, go left, go east, and that's what we did, and it felt right.
We kept driving, and she said, "Don't worry, he's going to be found." And looking at the map, and she says, "I believe he's in the back of Harrison area."
Psychic Lori McQuarrie has never been to British Columbia before. Yet she marks an area on her map, sensing that Bill Rudy's body lies in the mountains to the east of Vancouver.
Whatever I pointed to, I felt strongly about it. And the problem always is, usually people aren't dumped on a sidewalk. They're dumped in acreage.
In fact, the area Lori circles is the perfect place to hide a body. It's vast, rugged, and remote. They drive all day, but the psychic can't seem to zero in on the exact location of his remains.
I didn't think we were going to find him that day, but I would have been pretty excited if we had found his glasses or his jacket.
Though they come away from the wilderness empty-handed, the psychic is convinced her vision of Bill Rudy's fate is right. But 2 weeks later, there's another twist in the tale of Bill Rudy. His van is found, abandoned at Vancouver Airport. For the police, it's further evidence that he wanted to disappear.
And they said, well, we've located his vehicle. We found it at the airport. So obviously he's left the country.
You find a vehicle there, and that's a pretty good indicator that he's gone to the airport to leave.
But when Janet picks up the van, what she discovers tells her it wasn't Bill Rudy who drove it to the airport.
The music was totally loud. Okay, well, that's not Bill. And totally on a radio station that Bill, it was heavy rock or something, and just really, really loud, right? And it's I had an eerie feeling driving that van too, right back to Surrey, so.
Has Bill Rudy been murdered? Or has he vanished of his own accord to start a new life under a new alias, as the police suspect? At great cost, Janet remains convinced her fiancé would never leave her, and she continues to search for him.
I just stopped working until I could find out what happened to Bill. So I lost my career. Ultimately, I was evicted from Bill's house with like 3 days notice, and I spent all my money. And I remember my dad said to me, you can spend the rest of your life going through the bush looking for him, and you may never find him. And so I was coming to that point, and I never thought he would be found.
Months and then years pass, and the case cools and finally goes stone cold. Then, on September 27th, 1996, 2.5 years later, a logger makes a grisly discovery.
And I looked over and I couldn't believe it. I found a skull.
Suddenly, the Bill Rudy case is red hot. 2.5 years after Janet Bignell's fiancé, nightclub owner Bill Rudy, disappeared, there's a new twist to the story. In September 1996, a logger working in thick forest in the Harrison Mills area east of Vancouver stumbles on the unexpected, a human skull. Psychic Laurie McQuarrie says Bill Rudy's been murdered and his body has been dumped in Harrison Mills.
I felt that there had been a blow to the back of the head.
Will she be proved right? The logger immediately contacts the RCMP. They find a suspicious crack on the back of the skull, but nothing to identify whose skull it is. The skull is shipped to a crime lab for DNA analysis. Because of a huge backlog, it would take almost 2 years for the tests to identify the remains. But when the result came in, incredibly, they confirmed the skull belongs to Bill Rudy. Psychic Laurie McQuarrie was right. Bill Rudy had been buried in the exact area she marked on a map 4 years earlier.
Whatever I pointed to and drew a circle on, I felt strongly about it.
What police thought all along was a missing person case is in fact now a murder. Forensics showed Bill Rudy was killed by a blow to the back of the head, again, just as the psychic had predicted.
I could just feel it, like almost Bill was standing there not expecting it.
After 4 years, the Bill Rudy case is now officially a murder investigation.
In the case of missing persons, that file would be handed over to an active homicide unit. And they would then take over the investigation, review the file, and start over again.
And the first person the RCMP call is Janet Bignell.
Said that human remains had been found through DNA, have been positively identified to be William Rudy. And that's exactly the way he told me. It's really cold.
But she's not prepared for what happens next.
He brought another police officer in there, and then they started recording it. And then ultimately, as time went by, I found out that part of that was because now I was actually a suspect. I couldn't even believe it.
But the person the police are most interested in is Bill Rudy's business partner, David Lowe.
Mr. Lowe told investigators originally that everything was okay, that Mr. Rudy had been paid up and now Mr. Lowe was inheriting the business. It didn't take investigators very long to realize that Mr. Lowe had said things originally that were not true.
But with no crime scene, no weapon, and a very cold case, proving that David Lowe killed Bill Rudy isn't going to be easy. What police do know is David Lowe's lifestyle had changed dramatically since Rudy disappeared.
He's making tons of money, and he didn't invest it back into the club. He went on, 2 or 3 cruises a year, Mercedes, race car.
Lowe's high-rolling lifestyle had caught up with him. He had defaulted on the mortgage and lost the Rumors nightclub. David Lowe was now working as a car salesman and herding for cash, so the police decide to exploit his weakness.
The body was a car salesman, not very good at it, apparently, so not a whole lot of income. So when he realized he could regain some status, some power, get some money, he was just prime for the bait. He wouldn't have been thinking after so many years that now he was becoming a target of a sting operation.
3 years after police confirm Bill Rudy was murdered, an undercover officer known as Jason meets and begins to form a relationship with David Lowe.
Jason was tasked to befriend Mr. Lowe and slowly gain his trust.
Jason convinces Lowe that he's a gangster and tells him he can make big money if he can prove that he too is a bad guy. Finally, David Lowe tells Jason what he wants to hear, that he killed a man. With that admission, Jason tells David Lowe he can now meet his boss.
You've told me a story about a murder, so you got to tell it to the boss to impress him. So he knows that he's not going to make the big money, he's not going to get any status or power till he's in. And this is do or die for him. It's the job interview.
At that meeting, Lowe admits to killing someone.
I whacked the guy. I hit my partner with a hammer.
They got the confession and they got it on videotape.
After a 6-month sting operation, undercover cops arrest and charge David Lowe with the murder of Bill Rudy. Money was the motive.
He missed payments, and basically Bill was going to put the squeeze on him.
His back was against the wall, and he didn't want to lose everything he had in life, and he was going to.
During David Lowe's trial, testimony confirms all of psychic Laurie McQuarrie's visions of the crime 10 years earlier. The murder did take place in Rumor's nightclub, where Lowe crushed Rudy's skull with a hammer. Lowe did take Rudy's body to Harrison Mills and dumped him deep in the forest.
I knew it would come full circle. I knew they'd find him. I knew this would end up being solved.
She totally does have a natural gift, right? And I'll be forever grateful to her for sure.
On July 5th, 2004, 9 years after Bill Rudy had vanished, David Lowe is convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to 25 years in prison. Finally, after 9 years, David Lowe's conviction gives Janet some peace.
And now at least I feel vindicated that the person is caught in jail, and it would have been worse to go through the rest of my life without knowing.
David Lowe is appealing his conviction. Janet Bignell has a new life, but she will never forget Bill Rudy.
I miss him. My life would have been a lot different, but I have learned a lot. I've learned not always to take people at face value.
The summer of '79, and someone is sexually assaulting young women in a Virginia college town.
We concluded that we had a serial rapist. People were scared to death.
Investigators have little to go on.
We were desperate. We wanted any help we could get.
Under the gun to solve the case, the police turn to a psychic.
This rapist is apologizing to me.
There's obviously some powers at work there.
Oh my gosh, well, what are we into?
Will the psychic help the police to stop a serial rapist before he becomes a serial murderer? Stanton, Virginia, a small, sleepy southern town nestled in the Shenandoah Valley, the birthplace of Woodrow Wilson, the 28th President of the United States.
It was a city of 25,000, but it was sort of caught in time.
But on the evening of March 14th, 1979, Stanton's peace is shattered. A knife-wielding rapist attacks a 22-year-old student in her room at the local college. It is the first in what would be a string of violent sexual assaults.
Stanton Police Department. I just remember getting the call, and the lady was very hysterical and upset, which, of course, anyone would have been going through that. I just remember how I felt so scared and helpless. My main thing was to try to keep her calm until a police officer could arrive.
Detective Ronnie Wiseman is put on the case.
Our first rape was very unusual because we had very few rapes at all. And this one seemed to be rape from a stranger.
All police have to go on is a composite drawing of the assailant based on the victim's vague description. Then, 2.5 months later, a second rape, only blocks away from the college. Again, few clues for the police.
Person came in a window on each one. He used a knife, and he had a stocking mask on. And so our best description was height and weight, race. Was about it.
Both victims described their attacker as a large African American. But because of the mask, they can't see his features, and he leaves few clues. Ray Robertson is the prosecutor for the city of Stanton.
Back in 1979, we didn't have DNA evidence. Any foreign hairs, any semen, any saliva, anything like that we found on them, we could get the DNA on that now. We couldn't do that back in 1979, and so it's a very different game when it comes to solving crimes now from what it was back then.
We just had no evidence.
With a violent rapist on the loose, the whole town is on edge.
For something like that to happen around here was a really big deal. That kind of stuff just didn't happen in Stanton. It made me be much more aware. Any place I went, I was always checking, being more cautious.
During that particular time, women were kind of afraid to walk streets at night alone, especially in the college area. All the windows were down and locked.
In a town where serious crime is all but unheard of, the pressure on local police for results is immense.
The community was actually in pretty much of an uproar.
I was following the news in the newspaper daily, especially on this case, because there was so much turmoil. I would say, wow, I don't envy the police officers that's working this case, because it's got to be tough.
Everyone that you would come in contact with, regardless of what you were doing, wanted to know how the case was going.
Then, driving by a construction site, the victim of one of the rapes spots the man she thinks attacked her.
One of the victims said, that's him. That's him. There's no question about it.
Police arrest the man, but they soon realize the case against him is flimsy.
The guy wore a stocking mask. How can you make an identification of a suspect that has a stocking mask on?
I think everyone knew that it was not right.
He had been convicted of minor offenses that were very different from the type of offenses that a rapist usually commits, and I really didn't think he had done it.
No sooner is the first suspect released than the other rape victim names a different man. A man she vaguely knows, and he too is arrested.
He actually flunked a polygraph test, so on the basis of the victim identification and the polygraph results, he was arrested.
Everyone seemed to say, oh boy, we got the guy. We can relax a little bit.
But the police don't relax for long. Less than a month later, a third attack, just like the first two. Wearing a stocking mask and wielding a knife, a man climbs through a window and rapes a 32-year-old woman. All this while the investigator's prime suspect is behind bars.
The second person that was arrested was in jail when the third incident happened. Really didn't think we had two people doing these acts.
The suspect is released.
It's very sad. The police were scrambling to get an arrest in the case.
Women were on edge, and we were getting a little frustrated and maybe a little antsy, too, to solve some of these things.
With 3 identical attacks, police believe, unless stopped, the man will almost certainly rape again.
We realized after about 2 or 3, we had a serial rapist. This is something that was very new. We'd never had anything like this.
Under intense pressure, Detective Wiseman calls in Special Agent Darrell Stillwell of the state police.
You had a person that was operating within about a 5-block area. There were all types of sightings, window peepings, entries into houses, burglaries, thefts of small items.
The perpetrator's rapid escalation from petty burglary to violent rape makes police fear what he'll do next.
The possibility that something will go down, a resistance that will cause a homicide. There's always the possibility of that.
Then, 6 months after the rapes began, a chance event changes the whole course of the investigation. Psychic Noreen Rainier arrives in town to give a talk at the local college about ESP and the paranormal.
I had been teaching at Blue Ridge Community College, and at the very end of my lecture, a young lady stood up in the audience and asked me if I would do a public service. I said yes, and she told me that there had been a rapist in the town, and her sister had been one of the victims, and if I could hold her ring and see if I picked up anything.
Noreen uses psychometry, a common psychic technique.
It seems that object has memory or goes beyond memory, and I can see images in my head.
Noreen holds the victim's ring while the student records her response.
And I remember holding it and picking up several pieces of information that came into my mind. She had a tape recorder and was taping it.
Despite knowing nothing about the case, Noreen immediately connects with the horror that is gripping the town.
I felt this small, peaceful, beautiful community was terrorized, certainly the women, because of this rapist attacking again and again.
Noreen also claims to see details of the actual crime.
I remember seeing a stocking mask over...
Desperate to see her sister's attacker brought to justice, the student takes the tape recording of the psychic to the police.
Stocking mask.
The cops are doubtful at first, but agree to listen to the tape. Like the student, they are impressed with what Noreen has to say.
Noreen told us this guy had used a stocking mask and a knife in all his rapes. All the things that the victim had told us that never were reported in the media.
Well, we were sort of in disbelief. How does she know this? Because these things weren't out.
On September 2nd, a fourth woman is raped. The victim, a young woman who was babysitting for friends. And then, a few weeks later, the rapist, wearing his trademark stocking mask, strikes again, this time a 23-year-old woman.
The public image of the Stanton Police Department plummeted. It was a worst-case scenario.
With the attacks becoming more frequent and more brazen, the cops are willing to try anything, even a psychic.
We were desperate. We wanted any help we could get.
Dabbling in the paranormal to solve a crime is not conventional police procedure.
We had no idea what we were getting into, and it was very new.
I think that when the police first agreed to work with me, they had no clues, and he kept raping, and they had no information, so they thought, what do we have to lose?
Can a psychic working with detectives help to track down a sexual predator before serial rape turns to murder?
And we looked at each other and thought, oh my gosh, well, what are we into?
In the summer of 1979, a violent sexual predator is haunting Stanton, Virginia.
We concluded that we had a serial rapist.
5 violent rapes have been committed by a mysterious masked man carrying a knife. With few leads, the police have all but hit a wall.
The public image of the Stanton Police Department plummeted. It was a worst-case scenario.
In desperation, the detectives turn to psychic Noreen Rainier, who has offered to help.
I was just nervous. I had never worked for the police before.
Today, Noreen Rainier is one of America's best-known psychics. But before Stanton, she had never worked with the police.
So my own concern was, will my mind be able to do what they want?
The first thing investigators do is take Noreen to the home of the third victim, the sister of the student Noreen had met.
We just let her go, didn't say a word like, yeah, you're right, or no, you're wrong, or anything.
We didn't chat, we just went, hello, hello, and I started working.
We took Noreen to this house. About halfway up the steps, she said he came in that window right there.
The rapist had climbed into the window and had touched the banister.
Noreen's vision uncannily matches what the investigators already believe.
We found a ladder laying in the yard, and we came to determine that the person went in a upstairs side window. These things had never gotten out.
How could the psychic know something that hadn't been released to the public and the media?
When he opened the window, in order to get in, he just had to sort of jump to the banister.
That banister had given police the one hard piece of physical evidence they have.
They'd gotten a real good palm print where he had to grab the banister.
Walking through the home, Noreen's paranormal visions of the attack come thick and fast.
He was already waiting for her when she got home. They said, show us.
She pointed to a room and said he was waiting back in that room for the victim to come home. That was true also. Before she got to the bedroom, she said, there's some violent activity up here.
They looked at each other, but they didn't say anything. And then we walked in.
She walked in the bedroom and sat down on the bed, and she started talking as if she were the victim.
Noreen's description of the attack matches every detail of the victim's report. The rapist had come in the window. He had been hiding in wait. He had attacked her in her bedroom. Now, eerily, Noreen claims she has taken on the role of the victim and reveals something startling about the rapist.
He's apologizing to me. And I was so shocked. But it just was like a little scene from a movie, just that one quick little picture, and I could hear his words.
I'm sorry.
This bizarre detail that the rapist apologizes to his victims is already known to the investigators.
She was in a car accident.
He spoke to each victim, carried on very apologetic conversations.
And he apologized to some of the victims. It was very, very unusual.
But the psychic claims to have one more detail about the rapist.
I feel like his pants and shirt, they match. He's wearing a uniform. I could feel the material, and uniforms have a special heaviness to it. And I could tell that the pants and the shirt matched.
We were in disbelief. How does she know this? Because these things weren't out.
Noreen's first vision of the rapist suggests he's a laborer. But as she talks, she's also receiving other more cryptic psychic signals.
What I'm seeing, it seems to be going around and around.
The entire time, she would sit and talk, and she was drawing on the pad with a pencil, just drawing a perfect circle.
Noreen is sure the circles she's drawing mean something, but exactly what she can't say.
I remember first seeing him driving something. I remember knowing that whatever he drove went around and around.
She said, I have no idea what this means, but it has something to do with his occupation.
Without knowing anything, the psychic has accurately described the attacks and given the investigators a profile of the serial rapist.
There's obviously some powers at work there. It must be. And I've pretty much concluded that in my mind based upon this particular case.
Impressed with what they've learned so far, the detectives take Noreen to the home of the most recent victim.
They never told me any information, never gave me any feedback. Taking me to a second victim's house, I knew that I must be onto something.
There, she has a vision that would provide police with a vital clue. She claims to see where the rapist lives.
See this theater marquade, and I knew he lived real close. I remember feeling the brick.
Which was very interesting because there was an old theater right in the vicinity where all this was occurring. Most of these things occurred within a mile and a half, or just within 5 blocks.
Noreen has told the cops where she believes the rapist lives, but she also knows how he can be identified.
I wanted to go through his body to see if I could pick up any tattoos or scars. When I got to the knee, I could see the scar. First of all, it hurt. I remember the limping.
Pretty deep scar on his leg that would cause him a slight limp. Very new to us. We had no idea. She was getting a pretty detailed picture of this attack.
Can the psychic's cryptic clues help the police to track down a rapist who's already attacked 5 women?
And we had the information, but we didn't know what to do with it.
In the summer of 1979, a serial rapist is terrorizing the college town of Stanton, Virginia.
The police were scrambling to get an arrest in the case. There was a crisis of public confidence.
Desperate, the investigators have enlisted a psychic.
She said she was picking up energy, and she was taking on the role of this victim.
I feel theater. I knew we lived real close, and I could have felt I remember feeling the brick.
She said he lived in an apartment right across from a movie theater. Brick apartment, she even stated. We did concentrate on the brick apartment building across from the movie theater.
We were in plane cars, and we had them positioned all around the city, and especially in that particular area.
The community became absolutely racked with fear. There was a tremendous need to get this case solved.
And it could have gone real bad for us.
Armed with details provided by Noreen's extraordinary psychic visions, police stake out the movie house and other key locations in Stanton and lie in wait.
We spent many sleepless nights on this case.
We would stake out till 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, then come back out about 7.
Then, after 2 weeks of around-the-clock surveillance, on the evening of December 27th, a break.
Stanton Police Department.
A call came in that someone was peeking in the window.
The call comes from a woman living less than a block away from the movie house.
Ma'am, is the suspect still there? I understand, and I'll get an officer on...
We had one of our cars sitting right near the end of that driveway.
Got a report of a person messing around the house, looking in the windows and this, that, and the other. And when he came out of the yard, it was a fenced yard he had to walk out of. When he came out of the yard, we stopped him and questioned him about his business in the area.
And something else.
He had a limp.
Could this limp be linked to the scar the psychic predicted the rapist would have on his knee?
Did you hold up for a minute?
Wasn't his home. We didn't know anyone in the home. Told us he was looking for some boxes because he was moving. He told us, start telling us a number of things that just didn't make any sense.
Got any weapons on you? Anything on you?
I think we all looked at him and said, I think we have the right guy here. I don't think there was any question.
Have the police got the right man? He does live by the theater.
From around here? Yeah. Watch your head.
The peeping Tom is taken into custody without a struggle. That man is 22-year-old James Bruce Robinson of Stanton. Police charge him with attempted burglary. But is he the man responsible for raping 5 women?
We knew we had him pretty well there for an attempted B&E, but at that point we had no idea that he was the rapist.
We did get his fingerprints, and I'd gotten a good palm print, so I took his palm prints, and we took those to the lab the next day.
Then they remember one of Noreen's most detailed predictions. The rapist would have a big scar on his knee.
It's very strange to ask him to pull his pant legs up. He had no idea why we asked him that. I was so excited when he pulled his pant leg up and showed me a great big scar there. So all of these things just started coming together.
The psychic is right. But to nail Robinson, they need more. They need hard evidence.
The evidence that we had was pretty, shall I say, skimpy on each one of these sexual assaults as far as linking anything particularly to him. We had one palm print off of one of the scenes.
The investigators devise a plan to persuade Robinson to confess. They take him to the scene of his crimes.
It was a technique I used in many criminal investigations. Put him in a car and drive him to a neighborhood.
We did a lot of running around in the car with him, asking him things as we drove by people's houses that he had visited.
And he started out making confessions to trespasses and burglaries. That's how it started. You know.
Despite admitting to a string of burglaries, Robinson denies rape. But then, suddenly...
Sir, the lab just called back. Your palm print matches your suspect.
We got a call over the radio that the lab had called and matched that palm print. He knew exactly now that he's had it.
Confronted with the evidence, James Robinson breaks down and confesses to the rapes.
He gave the police details that only the true rapist could have known.
There's little doubt that Noreen helped police put the serial rapist behind bars. Her remarkable insights were right on almost every count. She described how the perpetrator had entered the homes, how he had apologized to his victims. She told police the suspect lived close to a theater, that he limped, and he had a scar on his knee.
This is Dixie movie theater. It's been here for years. And coincidentally, right across the street are the Woodward Apartments, and where the suspect was found to live.
And what about those puzzling circles Noreen drew?
The suspect drove a cement mixer truck. He would leave the truck parked in front of the apartment or somewhere close, and he'd go in.
I must admit I was very impressed by that he drives something that goes round and round, and it turned out to be a cement mixer truck. That was pretty cool.
Noreen's vision of a man in uniform is also true.
The night we picked him up, he had the shirt on.
At the trial, the prosecution paint a chilling portrait of a man driven to rape and rape again. James Bruce Robinson pleads guilty and is sentenced to 5 concurrent 20-year sentences for the Stanton rapes.
We were very impressed with Noreen and the information that she was able to give us.
It gives you a little extra something to look for, you know, when you're out on the street.
Everything that she gave came about.
And then at the very end, when I left, as they were shaking my hands, they said, "When will we catch him?" And I thought for a second, and I said, "Before Christmas."
And we got him on December 22nd.
Called me later to thank me for my Christmas present.
In 1987, when 2 teenage girls are murdered in Thunder Bay, Canada, the police fear the worst.
I immediately thought that we had a serial killer working the area.
Police think they've got their man, but a psychic says they're wrong.
I felt terrible, but I had to tell him I'm having trouble recognizing the face I see.
In the public's mind, it was going to be sort of a miracle if anybody was caught because so much time had elapsed.
Then, 13 years later, a stone-cold case comes back to life. Was the psychic right all along?
I knew I had seen that face so clearly.
On the shores of Lake Superior sits Thunder Bay, Ontario, Canada. In the 1600s, a fur trading post. Today, a struggling industrial town. On Sunday, May 10th, 1987, Mother's Day, an elderly couple out on their morning walk discover the body of a young woman laying in a gravel pit. First to arrive on the scene is Constable Jerry Moran of the Ontario Provincial Police.
The body was located right in the area here. The top had been pulled up and her jeans were undone. Her shoes were removed and laid beside the body.
Police comb the scene and find a plastic bag containing a beer bottle and what appears to be the undergarments of their victim.
The thing that was going through my mind at the time was
Somebody's Mother's Day had been ruined for the rest of their lives.
But Detective Moran has a job to do and puts his personal feelings aside.
You treat it very businesslike. You're detached. Any short-lived evidence, anything that weather could destroy, we have to try to preserve that as fast as possible.
At the scene, police also find shoe prints and tire marks. The young woman is identified as 17-year-old high school student Donna Tebenham.
The body of 17-year-old Donna Tebenham was found yesterday afternoon in a gravel pit north of the city. As for details, that's about all the OPP is releasing so far.
The circumstances surrounding it dictates that we are or have forwarded the body to the Center of Forensic Sciences in Toronto for expert examination.
Donna Tebbenham was your typical 16-year-old girl. You know, she went to school, she had friends.
Julio Gomes is a local journalist for the Thunder Bay Chronicle.
I've lived all my life in Thunder Bay, and at the time I was a teenager as well. And I know my own feeling was one of shock.
An autopsy reveals she died of asphyxiation. There were small traces of alcohol in her body, but no drugs. A sample of semen is also recovered. Another curious clue. Tiny specks of blue paint were lifted from her clothing.
The blue paint was at one point used on a specific year of pickup trucks. Anybody that wanted to paint their vehicle could have painted it that blue, but we had established based on the wheelbase and the axle width that it was a truck.
Police learned that Donna had spent the previous evening visiting friends. She was last seen walking back from a local corner store at about 11 p.m. Calls from the public kept police busy, but brought them no closer to a suspect.
We had so many suspects, or what could be considered persons of interest, but as it turned out, in all the cases, it was a dead end. People would come forward and just say that they have reason to suspect this person because they said something. They said they may have seen this girl at a party, or they said that they went to school with this girl and they've done things to this girl and things like that. Just, they were blowhards at a party, most of them, that would just want to get attention for themselves and admit to doing anything. And all these guys were subsequently ruled out as suspects.
Another snag. Partial fingerprints found on the beer bottle at the scene turn up no matches. With no suspects, and with no DNA testing in 1987, the semen sample sat on the shelf. The most promising clue police had appeared to be the blue repaint chips found on the body, but record-keeping back then was less exact. Tracking down a blue repainted truck had to be done by sight.
In this particular case, we were looking for a travel or an international travel truck. It's like an old Chevy Suburban. So there weren't too many of them around. So we were tracking those things down, and we spent months looking for everybody that was registered or had ever owned one of those. And so that's all time consuming.
Thunder Bay is a small town, and there are unfortunately a lot of other unsolved murders that take place, and every couple of years you'd have someone that disappears and they're never found.
Then, Friday, August 7th, another body is spotted off the side of the road just a few miles from where Donna Tebbenham was murdered 3 months earlier. The second victim is another Thunder Bay High School student, 16-year-old Bernadette LeClaire.
We were supposed to go dancing. I didn't hear from her. I knew something was wrong.
David Binquist was Bernadette LeClaire's boyfriend at the time she went missing.
And I just happened to be flipping through the newspaper, and they had a little article about a native girl found in the power lines. My heart almost jumped out of my chest.
The crime scene appears chillingly familiar to Constable Moran.
The victims were the same age. There was no obvious signs of violent death, but there was a plastic bag put over her head.
Shoe prints and tire tracks match the Donna Tebbenham scene. Police also make another key discovery.
We found blue repaint chips on both bodies. I immediately thought that we had a serial killer working the area.
Then police get a promising lead. A woman walks into the station and says she knows who the killer is. She claims her boyfriend, who we will call Ron Newman, picked up a woman at the same corner store where Donna Tebbenham was last seen the night she went missing.
She was allegedly an eyewitness to the actual apprehension.
So the police questioned him, and then they arrested him. And he was charged with 2 counts of murder.
Attorney Lee Begg had been working on Ron Newman's case since the day the arrest was made. Police fingerprint Newman, but the prints don't match, and he doesn't drive a blue truck. But police aren't giving up so easily.
We couldn't rule him out as a suspect just due to the fact that his prints didn't match what was found at our scene. He could have been wearing gloves. He could very well not have touched anything.
Nobody minds defending a guilty person, but when it's an innocent person, the task becomes so much more serious because you dare not make a mistake.
And police would learn that they had made a big one. At a preliminary hearing, the OPP's case against Ron Newman falls apart.
Well, she just didn't withstand cross-examination to the extent that the Crown had absolutely nothing to go on. There was no connection between my client and the murders whatsoever.
Finally, after spending 6 months in jail, the charges are dropped.
He was released, but unhappily for him, there was no one else to point the finger at.
We weren't defeated. We were still interested in pursuing the case, albeit from a different angle.
That different angle was a psychic.
One evening I was watching a documentary that involved a woman by the name of Noreen Rainier.
The use of psychics in police investigations is commonplace, but in Canada, almost unheard of. Will the psychic lead the OPP to a brutal serial killer?
I saw so clearly the face of the murderer.
In Thunder Bay, Ontario, the murder of 2 teenage girls has the city demanding answers. Police have a suspect, but not enough evidence to convict. Desperate for clues, a cop calls a psychic.
She had been successful with several American agencies, so I thought we had nothing to lose.
Noreen Rainier is a psychometrist who specializes in missing persons and homicide cases.
I like touching something off the victims, and metal is better for me. It seems to be a better conduit. It holds the energy or images of what that individual saw just before he or she was killed.
Detective Moran sends her a pair of earrings found on Donna Tebenham, as well as a necklace from Bernadette LeClaire.
When I first start a case, I have to prove to the police that I'm real. And so I always tell them a few things they already know, usually how the person was killed, what he or she looked like, or when they were alive, a few things like that to gain their confidence in me as a credible psychic. And then they can ask questions, and my mind just sees what they ask.
Yeah, I felt a little weird about the whole thing. I'd never been involved with a psychic. I'd never even been to a tea reader, but I figured, if it works, who am I to argue with it?
Like most of her cases, Noreen conducts her reading with Moran over the phone.
When I held Donna's earring, I remember seeing her sort of light brownish hair, and I feel she had problems with her S's. I see braces.
She described the victims very accurately, right down to the speech impediment on Tebenham and the character of LeClaire.
I had Bernadette's necklace, so it wasn't that difficult to be able to describe her. I felt more fuller lips. I felt more feisty, confident, a little bit rebellious, again young.
Then Noreen astounds Moran by describing the murder.
Remember, I couldn't breathe. Screaming. I'm having trouble breathing. Didn't feel any knives or guns or wounds of that sort, just not breathing.
It started, being a little unusual that she would know some of this stuff, and I certainly wasn't given this information to her.
Again, I closed my eyes, and I could feel, first of all, I felt a truck. And it was blue, it was low, and it had sort of a flat thing in the back of it.
I was somewhat surprised because that's the color of the vehicle we were looking for, based on the paint chips found in both scenes.
The eyes. I'm seeing the eyes now. On a face, when I close my eyes and I'm trying to describe the murderer, I don't see the whole face at one time.
But the whole face is what the police need, so Noreen sets up a circle group hoping to get a clearer picture of the killer.
I'm seeing an eye. A circle group is people with like minds. We're all hopefully trying to get the same answers. I was teaching at the time an ESP course, and some of my students had heard about the case that I was working on, and they wanted to become involved in it and help me see more. Large ears, more closer to the head. It was so clear. I saw it so clearly. I knew that if I had my artist draw it, that we would have a face for Constable Moran.
She subsequently got a hold of a sergeant from an American police force that had worked with her before, and based on her description, he drew a composite sketch of what she thought our suspect should look like.
Length. There was just a small space between the upper lip and the nose. I made a photostat copy of the sketch and sent it to Constable Moran and waited to hear what he had to say.
When I got the Polaroid picture of the composite sketch, it didn't look like anybody in particular that we had looked at.
Nothing. They didn't know who it was. I was devastated. I felt so like I was on, and he didn't know who my face was. I was just totally devastated.
It looks like another dead end, but Moran is not willing to give up just yet. He sends the psychic a stack of photos, including the photo of Ron Newman.
I didn't really recognize anyone in the lineup. I felt terrible, but I had to tell him. I'm having trouble recognizing the face I see.
At that point, I was somewhat disappointed, but I knew that there was no point in pursuing something that wasn't there.
But before the cop gives up on the psychic, he has one more question.
Will we get him, and when will we arrest him? And I said, yes, he's going to be 32 years old. He's going to have a mustache. And I saw the initial R. I didn't know if it was first or last name, but I saw R.
Moran is stumped by Noreen's clues. Ron Newman was 32 years old, and he had the letter R in his name. But the psychic sketch looks nothing like him.
The description that she made, really, it was a stretch to make it fit Newman.
The last conversation I had with Constable Moran was when he sent me the lineup of the faces. And that was the last time we spoke.
At that point, the case didn't go very much further. I was taken from the case and put back on general duties because there was no other avenues of investigation to pursue.
I questioned my ability. How could I see so clearly and it be so wrong? What was wrong? My mind, what was happening?
The case goes cold. 2 16-year-olds are dead and their killer is still out there. Police run occasional Crime Stoppers television spots, but no new leads surface.
It always seemed like they were at a dead end, and that really in the public's mind, it was going to be sort of a miracle if anybody was caught because so much time had elapsed.
In fact, 13 years go by. Then science steps in and reignites a cold case and confirms a psychic's long-forgotten vision.
How could I be so wrong when I had seen so clearly?
In Thunder Bay, Ontario, the murder of 2 teenage girls remains unsolved. 13 years pass, and then a breakthrough in fingerprinting technology offers new hope to cold cases. In August of 2000, an automated fingerprint identification system known as APHIS was upgraded to search and retrieve both finger and palm prints of convicted felons.
This led to numerous cases being cleared up, and one of them was the Tevin M. LeClaire case.
Partial prints found on a beer bottle and a plastic bag at the scenes could now be compared against pools of fingerprint records. APHIS turns up a hit, and the owner of the prints is Larry Runholm. In 1990, 3 years after the murders, Larry Runholm, a native of Thunder Bay, had been arrested and charged with drinking and driving. His fingerprints were forwarded to the RCMP and remained on file for 10 years, until the new technology made the match. A case that has baffled cops for 13 years is finally solved. On July 11th, 2000, Runholm is charged with the murders of Donna Tevenham and Bernadette LeClaire.
It was a huge story when he was arrested because the community had almost forgotten about these deaths, and the few people that still remember it had almost given up any hope that anyone would ever be arrested and held to account for it.
The arrest finally vindicated a psychic who 13 years earlier accurately described both girls, their dark hair, Donna's braces, and Bernadette's feisty personality. She even envisioned their deaths.
I'm having trouble breathing.
But it was her sketch of the killer that police turned a blind eye 2 years ago that now came back to haunt them.
The profile provided by Noreen Rainier regarding a suspect turned out it was amazingly accurate. At the time of the murders, Mr. Runholm was only 19. We have a high school photograph, Mr. Runholm. The prominent nose, the full mouth, the length of the hair.
Other puzzling clues offered by the psychic now seemed to make sense as well.
I remember Constable Moran saying, "Will we get him, and when will we arrest him?" And I said, yes, he's going to be 32 years old. He's going to have a mustache. And I saw the initial R. I didn't know if it was first or last name, but I saw R. So I was overjoyed that my information was right. Sad that it didn't help in a timely manner.
Runholm admits to intentionally killing both girls and avoids a jury trial by pleading guilty to second-degree murder.
And Larry Runholm never took the stand, never explained anything. His lawyer said he has no memory of what happened, so he has nothing to offer.
Runholm claims he can't remember what happened back in 1987 when the girls, both 16, were believed to have been raped and then suffocated 3 months apart. But Justice Stanley Carisco, in his sentencing address, says he saw no evidence of amnesia, and he says the families deserve an explanation for these sickening murders.
You know, the guy is a vicious killer, sadistic, and the judge saw through him, and I'm very thankful for that.
To this day, the police don't know exactly what happened the nights the two girls went missing. What they do know is that both girls were suffocated with a plastic bag. DNA testing of semen taken from both girls matched Larry Runholm, and blue paint chips found on both girls matched the paint and make of the truck he drove.
Why did he do it? And how could he live with himself for the next 15 years, where ostensibly he was raising a family and leading a normal life? It's one of those just baffling things that you constantly think about and say, you know, what really happened?
His plea of second-degree murder carries an automatic life sentence.
The ruling of 20 years came as some satisfaction and closure for the families of the victims.
Second-degree murder for two girls, I would have liked to have seen, 22, if not a little bit more. But I am pleased it's over.
There was a certain amount of uncertainty that we had stepping in here today and just wondering where the judge was going to end up. So at 20 years, I think my sister was well served.
Look at that. How many lives he's destroyed. I don't think he got what he deserves. But I know he'll get what he deserves where he's going.
If the police had used the psychic's sketch in their investigation, would the murders have been solved sooner? An article published a few weeks after Runholm's arrest revealed that police did have him in their sights, but he was somehow overlooked.
He had lived on a road with his parents, and his parents were away all summer, had a tourist camp, which they ran, and so he had the run of the house, came and went as he pleased. His house was on the same route that myself and my partner did a door-to-door knock on, and as it happens that the one side of the road that my partner was on was the same house that Mr. Runholm lived in, and he wasn't home the two times we went there. But at that point, we had no reason to suspect Mr. Runholm of anything. He was just another name to be cleared.
The police just using me is right, but they are not used to working with psychics, so they don't understand how we work and how they have to interpret our clues. It's not all factual the way in this reality. my goal, and still will be till it happens, is to train and teach the detectives how to do what I can do.
In hindsight, the clues that Miss Rainier provided, although we were disappointed that we weren't able to successfully charge suspect number one, it did prove to be very accurate for suspect number two, although 13 years down the road. I'm glad I used the psychic because it sort of opens up a whole new avenue of investigation. We had nothing to lose by using her and everything to gain.
How dare I had doubted my own psychic ability. So, yes, I was joyful in knowing that my ability was working and does work. And again, like faith, don't doubt, believe.